Happy Friday. This is Anna, one of the owners of Luna Anais Gallery. We are currently holding a solo exhibition of Alexandra Carter's work until November 7th. So Alexandra Carter received an MFA from Goldsmiths University of London in 2015 and a BA from Rhodes College in Memphis in 2009. So she's had quite a few solo exhibitions, but the last couple have been in Los Angeles, currently at Luna Anais, and also at Radiant Space in 2018 and 2019. And she's also had solo exhibitions around the world, like Italy. She's done residencies and has been granted grant projects nationally and internationally, which includes Rome, Sicily, India, and Slovenia. So her current show is called A Sense of Heat in Her Brain, and this artist talk will cover that exhibition. So I will let Alexandra take it from here.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys all for being here right now. I'm just going to go ahead and start and try to share my screen. Let's see. There we go. And yeah, if everyone else could mute, just so there's no echo or anything while I do this, that would be great. Yeah, okay. So here, yeah, so thank you all for coming. Here's an installation picture from the show that's currently up, which is up until November 7th, by the way. So if any of you are in LA and haven't made it yet, just make an appointment on the gallery website. And it was great, actually, and thank you for all of you who did come already. It was awesome to actually be in a space with people safely and talking about the work and having the work right there. But in the following slides, I'll be able to get into more like what went into making the work and behind the work. So I'm gonna dive right in. Oh, hold on. And just start with the title. It comes from this quote from medieval times by Hildegard von Bingen. And it reads, "When a woman is making love with a man, a sense of heat in her brain, which brings with it a sensual delight, communicates the taste of that delight." This quote for me points to one of the major themes throughout the work, that of sex and pleasure. In a lot of my paintings, so I'll start with this one. A lot of my paintings, the figures are kind of embroiled in the throes of ecstasy, as we see in this piece here. A lot of the figures have this sense of jouissance, which I included in the title here. Jouissance is a term that's referred to in psychoanalytic theory as an extreme problematic pleasure containing pain as well as deep enjoyment, or that's how I conceptualize it anyways. And the quote, "a sense of heat in her brain," while literally describing the female orgasm, really captures the essence of jouissance for me. It points to the thinking intellectual brain, while also reducing it to exactly what it is, a muscle in our body, kind of bringing us back to our corporeality. So this piece started simply as the man or whoever at the bottom pleasuring this torso on top of him. And then I saw this torso's kind of similarity with Francisco Goya's famous painting, Saturn devouring his son, which refers to an early Greek myth. And I will definitely get more into mythology later on. But I wanted to quote Goya's depiction of the face of Saturn for this, because it kind of turned this painting, it made this painting into an act of, like a figure eight of eating, and both pleasurable and painful, a kind of chain of one thing eating another, a circle of consumption. So another major theme in the work is fertility, and throughout all the work in the show, pretty much. in both the bodily and agricultural sense. So bodily, especially because I've been through treatment for infertility lately. And so this subject has become so real to me. So that pic in the corner is of me right before I had my eggs retrieved, which was quite a process. Good news in the end is that I am pregnant now, so IVF for the win. Also, agricultural fertility is a big subject, specifically cranberry agriculture. And the reason for that is that I grew up on a cranberry farm. So this is where I grew up in Kingston, Massachusetts. And just to get into cranberries a little bit, because you'll see a lot of them in the following slides, it's a very specific and delicate crop, maintained mostly by self-designed, self-made machinery. It's such a niche industry that farmers just make their own machinery. It's not mass-made. And careful tending year-round. Like infertility treatment, in a way, it requires a lot of very specific machinery, a lot of TLC, and all the right conditions at the right time. So this is an overhead image during cranberry harvest one year at our farm. Cranberries are also really specific to exactly where I grew up, near the base of Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And Cape Cod is where the very first wild cranberries were discovered and replanted. I'm sure you've probably heard the stories of colonial settlers coming and using them at Thanksgiving. Of course, the native tribes had been using them long before the settlers came. My father and his brother ran the crops. The berry symbolizes for me my childhood, my father, our sustenance. It also taps into a little bit of the tension that I had with some of my family's patriarchal attitudes. So while it has that tension, I feel like by using the cranberry in my work, I'm kind of reclaiming it and definitely feminizing it in a way. I love my family deeply, but it's definitely, the berry is a loaded symbol for me in that way. And then I like all the connotations that fruit itself comes along with, which I think are really complementary to my work. Fruit of the womb, forbidden fruit, all the roles different fruit plays in mythology, Eve and the apple, Persephone and the pomegranate, and so many more. And then there's the actual sensual connotations of fruit. I love how fruit makes us think of sweetness, succulence, an object loaded with juicy liquid as soon as you bite into it. Fruit is sexy. Plus there's the shape. There's so much I can do with the shape of a cranberry. I can turn them into eggs, breasts, other body parts, as you'll see in many of the following pieces. So here you see a big pile of berries. This piece itself was actually inspired by a play by Samuel Beckett called Happy Days. It's a bit of a misnomer of a title. The play depicts a woman who's pretty much buried in a trash heap or some kind of mound in a kind of metaphor for her life. The character's name is Winnie, hence the title. So here are the figures buried in the cranberry shapes. They're kind of off scale, much larger than normal, making them perhaps more bodily. The figure seems to be rising up out of it, or maybe sinking into it. The facial expression teeters the line between ecstasy and death, reconnecting to jouissance and that dangerous pleasure that I was talking about. So moving from agricultural fertility to bodily fertility, like a lot of these repeated icons of berry shapes, egg shapes, breast shapes, I really like using these globular shapes to constantly refer back to these major touchstones in my work. I also love referencing images of motherhood in art history, the way that their hands caress, hold, and support these appendages of baby or of breast. Breasts refer to the sustenance that only the female body can provide, on top of being a fetishized, sexualized body part. And here's eggs from an infertility standpoint, the types of images I saw over and over while I was going through treatment to stimulate my eggs medically. So I became kind of egg obsessed, which brings me to this piece titled Amenorrhea Avenged. So amenorrhea is the stopping of the menstrual cycle, a cause of infertility, since it stops you from releasing eggs naturally. That was my cause of infertility. My diagnosis was amenorrhea. But it's not necessary to know that, though, to grasp this piece. I really think it's more about kind of the angst, passion, pain of womanhood and motherhood, both female anger and excitement. This woman seems to be part animal or some kind of mythical hybrid or exaggeration via this set of breasts that she has. Oh. The print at the bottom of the composition of this baby in this bag or bubble is a direct image transfer from a very old medieval illustration of a fetus in a uterus. So here's some of the inspiration image there. This is, I guess, what they assumed it looked like back then. Like a baby in a balloon. And I just love how comical and acrobatic the little figure looks. And I really think that that figure brought some of those acrobatics into the space of the painting here, alongside this big strand of red baubles, which can connote berries again, eggs, or blood here. But also for me, it reminds me of cranberry garlands that you make at Christmas. Hold on one second. I should take a second to explain my materials. They're pretty important and decisive in how the work ends up looking. I work on a material called drafting film. This is me holding a piece of it here. And what it is, it's a non-porous polyester film that has a translucent matte surface. It's also known as mylar, duralar, polyester film, or drafting vellum, but it's very different from regular vellum since it's non-porous and it's not delicate like vellum at all. I've been using it a really long time due to its durability and the way that my media sits on its surface. So as for my media, here's a time lapse for you to kind of show what it looks like when I'm working. I primarily paint with ink, and ink is basically highly concentrated acrylic colors, which I form into puddles and shapes using sable brushes and a lot of water. So it operates really similarly to watercolor, but it's much more durable than watercolor. It's more light fast. Once it dries, it's waterproof, etc. And I like this little movie. It's just a more real-time way to show how the pigments kind of slowly bleed into one another, creating their own organic shapes that I really like. I also use another technique to combine photographic prints into my paintings, further layering the compositions in other ways to create like a variety of different marks. I use a solvent called xylene to transfer the images I print out from my laser printer. And I really like how the photographic image, I like using the photograph because it really refers to an actual thing, a thing that exists, a documentation of something. And so for me, like these photos are photos I've taken of berries from our farm. And I really like that directness and that sense of documentation. You can see the use of those image transfers here a lot, where transfers of cranberries augment the bulbous forms of these fertile bodies. This way, I feel like I've linked the figures more personally with fertility, both agriculturally and bodily. That series is based on ancient fertility figures like these. I'm really fascinated by the prevalence of these highly abbreviated, simple female forms that have been found across all cultures and eras. I'm just going to go through each one really quick just to show you their specific references. So this one was based on this really cool Turkish fertility remnant. This one's based on a fertility figure that's more well-known, the Venus of Lesbug. I love how this one really capitalizes on the berry transfers given the generous shapes of her torso. I also like the anonymity of the face, where I used a whitish yellow cranberry transfer, and that's what they look like when they're underripe, is this kind of whitish color. This one's based on an ancient terracotta representation of Baobo, a mythological symbol of fertility, which I will get into later. This piece also includes an image transfer from a botanical illustration of cranberry vines, which you can see in this detail shot. So I like this detail shot because it really shows you how I'm layering in the image transfers and working over it with ink. So as for Baobo, she comes from the myth of Demeter and Persephone. I explore myth and folklore a lot in my work, and I return to this one a lot due to its symbolism of agricultural fertility as well as motherhood. So Demeter is the goddess of the harvest and agriculture, and her daughter Persephone gets kidnapped by Hades and becomes his wife. Demeter is so upset by this that she neglects agriculture and all the crops in the land die. So then along comes Baobo, also called the goddess of obscenity or the goddess of belly laughs. And long story short, she cheers Demeter up and contributes to her perseverance, eventually getting her daughter back for half the year, every year. And so the mythological explanation of the seasons was born. But Baobo is really visually interesting because in a lot of the stories, she's told to have had a mouth for her vulva and eyes for her nipples. Ancient representations of her depict her as a big head on legs with acorns in her crown. So here I replaced the acorns with cranberries, of course. But yeah, this deity has always fascinated me and brought light to the really heavy subject matter of infertility. She brings back the kind of sensuality and enjoyment of the body that I talked about in the beginning in terms of the show's title. So moving on to another piece. I see this figure as a kind of witch or fortune teller at her crystal ball or balls. This is how infertility feels. You're always wondering what's to come and what you could see if you were psychic. She also makes me think of Hecate, a witch goddess from the Greek mythology who's also involved in Demeter's story. The globular shapes here might refer to her breasts, a bunch of berries, a set of eggs. The berry in the bottom center, the one her fingers are touching, is a cross section of a cranberry. So if you ever open a cranberry, you'll see 4 air chambers inside, and that's why they float. The fish refers, the fish which is like, you can see it in the gold leaf. It refers to some kind of transformation or otherworldliness coming into the piece. And the title Mothermonger refers to the maternal word mother, but pronounced with a Boston accent, like the people I grew up with would pronounce it. And monger, referring to fishmonger, or it could refer to fear-mongering, or what I like to think of as an eggmonger. I painted this at the time that I was going through egg retrieval surgery, so I definitely had eggs on my mind at that moment. So that work employs another tactic of mine, that of self-performance. I often use myself as my model, creating a private performance for my camera, spurred by images or words, reenacting a story through movement or facial expression. The photos I take then become my reference images, and it really energized what follows. Using the personal, immediate material of my own body really makes the resultant painting feel like a more authentic, expressive form. These ones were used as reference for the next piece I'll show you, called astaxanthin. So based on those images, the figure on the left really seems to be in some kind of aura of ecstasy, pleasure, or perhaps exasperation. I like using these reference images with the netting. To me, the netting kind of signifies a gathering of goods, a harvest, reaping, or perhaps entrapment. Part of the netting is overlaid with gold leaf, you'll see here. It's a kind of special marbleized type of gold leaf called variegated gold leaf, signifying kind of value and adornment. I also can't not talk about the big old lobster in the painting. Where I came from in New England, lobster is a huge industry. Here in California, however, they're much less entrenched part of the culture, and they're a different species of lobster. The spiny lobster, which is the kind that I've depicted here. The big difference with the spiny lobster is that it doesn't have the big claws that New England lobsters have. But it is still super delicious, and I really like the connotations of lobster in general as a succulent delicacy or sought after precious meat, similar maybe to cranberries in a way. The lobster is entangled in the figure in a way that reminds me a lot of this piece by Hokusai, this erotic octopus print. Another thing to note, because the drafting film is translucent, these pieces can be viewed from either side. So here it is flipped over. Another thing I wanted to point out was this, there is this print of a cranberry, image transfer, near the very center of the piece, signifying my background, as well as like making a kind of solar plexus of the piece, a kind of heart of sorts. And here I am working on it in the studio. So this piece I see as being really similar to astaxanthin. There's a kind of team of intermingling figures here, engaged in some kind of interaction, whether in collaboration or conflict is unclear. I see the red and pink areas of the composition as areas where there's some kind of transition happening. These pink and red shapes could be like a shroud or a matador's cape, then becoming or turning into berries, blood, a baby, etc. Here's one of the inspirations for the piece, a Japanese ink work of a baby stealing demon, or ubume, the spirit of pregnant women. The fish in the painting is a California sheephead. These are really interesting species as they're always born female, and they each transition to male as soon as they reach a certain size. So it signifies yet another transformation happening in the piece. I figure this is a composition full of figures in flux. This piece is a blend of a bunch of different things, different figures and reference images, which I'll get to in a second. But the main figure holds this dripping red egg or berry, and she's being held by a net in an egg-like shape. So this work again is really referring to reproduction, self-presentation, containment, and fertility. I love the main figure's nonchalant body language as her stomach kind of flowers open. As for the title, corpus luteum is a term that refers to the egg sac that's left behind when a woman ovulates. If the woman becomes pregnant, the sac releases hormones crucial to maintaining that pregnancy. So because I did IVF, my corpus luteum was not intact, and I've had to medicate with progesterone injections during the pregnancy. So in a way, the corpus luteum was something that has been sorely missed by me. But in any case, I think it's just such a beautiful term, with corpus relating to the body and luteum relating to the moon. Given all the egg references in this painting, I thought it was such a fitting title. So the piece started from this, and you can kind of see, it started with this figure in the back. And that was inspired by Cha Cao, who was a Moulin Rouge dancer in the 1890s, and who Toulouse-Lautrec painted many times. I love the yellows in her costume, and I love the ostentatious presentation of these types of performances. I often source images from burlesque and other modes of performance for my work. Other imagery that became inlaid into the composition includes this old print from 1600s of a figure with a fetus in utero. Speaking of uterus, have you heard of the old idea of wandering wombs? It was the belief in medicine from ancient times up until recent centuries that ailments of women could be attributed to the displacement of their uterus, or like the wandering of their uterus inside of them. Often women's ailments were categorized as hysteria, based on the Greek root for uterus, hystera. So that's why, hence the title here. In the 1800s, psychoanalyst Jean-Martin Charcot propagated the treatment of so-called hysteria. And images like these came from his observations. And so one of these served as a reference image for the figure in the painting. The overarching image transfer in the painting comes from this old illustration of a uterus, the top one specifically. I was just really interested in looking at all these old anatomical illustrations at the time. And yeah, the top one's fascinating to me. I guess this is what it would look like having been dissected and removed from the body. A bunch of floppy, delicate tissue. But I really liked the image because it almost looked figurative, like some kind of angelic shroud. But yeah, so I like poking fun at this idea of the wandering womb and how preposterous it was and how little female health and anatomy is given proper study. But I also really like the witchy, dreamy, kind of trancy quality of the imagery layered together in this painting. The woman is levitating somehow in a contorted position below that hovering uterus. Here, there's another uterus of sorts, the cranberry blossoms. So that's, you can barely see them in the image, but here they are. So cranberry blossoms are the tiny flowers that precede the berry. They actually make a sort of uterus or ovary shape in the figure's lower abdomen. And again, we see my repeated use of the cranberry as breast here. The title, Ancestral Pemmican, refers to how cranberries were used in their early days. Often, they were mixed with animal fat into jerky-like strips called pemmican. The cranberries acted as a kind of preservative. And I think it's just interesting to equate this headless female body with meat, further objectifying it and maybe turning that on its head, subverting it a bit. The painting reminds me of this objectified image turned feminist poster icon, also used on the cover of Carol Adams' book. I'm not by any means a vegetarian, nor have I read this book. I just like using this as an example of this image in other contexts. For the figure's hands, I used image transfers of the fur gloves from surrealist sculptor Merritt Oppenheim's piece that you see here, which kind of further animalized the figure. The next works I'll show you were primarily made using cranberry as a medium. So over the years, I've experimented with different forms of cranberry, trying out its juice, concentrate, and puree to make marks. And I finally just settled on using the most concentrated and pigmented form of the juice. So here you can see me using it. And these darkest marks that I'm putting in here are made using the cranberry skin sediment found in the bottom of the bottle. And it's really similar to like the grape skin sediment that you find in the bottom of a wine bottle. I most often use antique linen napkins and handkerchiefs as an absorbent surface for this medium. So the juice acts as a stain and it points to intimate contact with the body. This piece was partially inspired by Angela Carter's book, The Bloody Chamber, which reimagines old fairy tales with a kind of feminist spin and highlights many of the characters' transformations and their sexuality in really beautiful language. There's a lot of women growing fur in this book, and it's fantastic. I highly recommend it. Compositionally, the piece was also inspired by this series of photos by the artist Ana Maria Maialino. She's a Brazil-based Italian artist who works with all different media, including performance and photography, talking about the self and subjectivity. This series was called Photo Poem Action and included this image, a mouth of gritted teeth framed by curly hairs. It brought to mind for me this kind of animalistic snarl, which paired with the delicate surface of this antique linen doily served a nice juxtaposition, I thought. And so I honored both of those creative voices in my title, Angela after A.M. Maialino. This piece I made in the early days of COVID when we were all starting to learn how this virus was spread. And this comes from this print that I had just found, and it was called something like The False Prophet. Sorry, I lost my notes. So there is a quote in it. And I think the quote's important. So I'm going to take 1 minute and go grab them. Sorry.
Sorry, finish.
Yeah, but you have to try. If anyone has any questions, feel free to send them through the chat and we can ask Alex afterwards.
Okay, I'm back. I found it. So I like the quote. And it reads, "I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon and out of the mouth of the beast and out of the mouth of the false prophet." And so I pay homage to that in my own title. And I thought it was kind of topical. I also really like how she's holding one tit kind of delicately in her hand, or maybe even squeezing it while choking on this creature, this pukey thing. Her other nipples kind of hover without context, perhaps attached to breasts, or perhaps just the buttons of a peacoat. So this one's titled Primipara. Means a woman who is giving birth for the first time. So while the title's a little autobiographical, the work is part of a slew of works that I've done in the past couple years, inspired by old depictions of mother and child. If you've ever really studied some of the old Renaissance paintings of the Madonna and Child, you'll know some of them are pretty odd and funny looking. But what I like most about them is their hands. Renaissance and Mannerist expressions of hands were just so poetic and beautiful. So here's the reference image for this one. Here I replaced the breast with a berry, signaling again the cranberry's actual role of sustenance in my own life, and its underlying play on the fruits of fertility. The next two pieces I'm going to show you were made in collaboration with my longtime friend and colleague, Heather Beardsley, who is with us on the call now. So if you have any questions specifically for her, definitely go ahead and ask afterwards. I definitely suggest you check out her work. Here's her info if you want to follow her. She works a lot with fibers and embroidery, as she did here. And I'm just gonna zoom in to show you some of the handiwork. I started these pieces last year, and then this year I washed them to fade the pigment a little bit, and I mailed them to Heather for her to add her own work to it. We shared this work as part of the US Postal Service art project, which has encouraged artists to collaborate via mail during the pandemic. This piece is another riff on Madonna and Child imagery, similar to Primi Para. Originally, I referenced another Renaissance hand holding her breasts, and I replaced the breast here with a pair of old, slightly wrinkled cranberries. You can't really see them that well anymore, but they're back there. I was thinking about the breasts as being these things that get tired, that deflate and become spent. The turtle-like figure on the right is from an old Japanese woodblock print of a kappa, which is an amphibious demon, which I happened on while researching Japanese folklore. Japanese mythology in general has long been an inspiration, especially its stories of ghosts and yokai, little demons like this one. The turtle reminded me of a weird wrinkled up baby, kind of like some of the funny looking wrinkly babies we see in Renaissance art. Meanwhile, I was thinking and learning a lot about ancient Greek Amazons, which are disputed to have been a real thing in history. They were ancient tribes of warrior women who managed to fight and live without men. The little figures on the top of the composition there is taken from, so there they are, taken from this medieval illustration of Amazons. This piece started as a kind of swimmer or dancer diving into a big stain of cranberry juice, which Heather then converted into a pile of cranberries using this really textural French knot technique of embroidery. It also has a really faint image transfer that you can see here. And that comes from this image, the middle image of this book from the 1800s, which was the first book published about cranberry farming, which I won on auction. The old diagrams in it show different breeds and ways of planting cranberries, much of which hasn't changed. The diagram that I printed into the piece is a breed called the cherry cranberry, which is particularly round and bulbous. And then just circling back to the drafting film pieces, I'm going to end with this piece, which for me also comes back to the idea of a sense of heat in her brain. Not only because it's possible these figures are engaged in some kind of pleasurable activity, but also because their heads are adorned with a kind of mane of fire. In their head and hair area, I transferred photographs of fire and photographs of people on fire. You can't really see them here, but when you're in person and you look closely, you can really see them. So it's really quite literally like a sense of heat in their brains. The figure on the right could be like a sphinx, female satyr, female centaur, or some other kind of creature, underlining my use of hybrids and transformations in my work. This piece also relates back to those self-performances I showed you earlier. see the reference again here. The characters that emerge from these references combine with my own fantastical elements, and the figures become kind of overloaded by their own extremities, as with many of the paintings. They're overwhelmed in breasts, feet, hands, or wings, hooves, scales, and tentacles. And yeah, I'll just finish here. And I'd love to take any questions or comments. Let's see, how do I? I'm trying to get back to the part where I can see like the chat and everything.
View options on the top, and then you click to unmute yourself.
And then I click what?
View options.
Maybe I'll just stop sharing. There we go. Now I can see things. Okay, no questions in the chat. But does anyone have a question? Because you can add it to the chat, or you can just speak up now.
So Alex, hey, it's Dave.
Hi.
So where do you see your work going in the future, now that things have changed?
Well, yeah. How would you say they've changed lately?
Well, they've changed what interactions with people, with the way that people see themselves as well, just generally in society.
Right. Yeah, I think, I mean, you can kind of see it in this work, because most of the work that I just showed you was made during the pandemic. There were only 2 pieces that weren't. And I feel like there's little ways that it filters in, but honestly, my life didn't change that much, because I've just been working out of my house, and I've always done that. And, you know, artist's life is pretty isolated, but I think there's little ways that it comes in, but I think there's other huge changes also happening in my life personally that is making it go into a certain direction, like this artist residency that I have in Finland coming up. It's supposed to be at the end of next year. I had to write a proposal for it right before the pandemic started, but that proposal was really focused on this idea of infertility being a big part of the work. And, you know, now that stage is kind of like, I've worked through that, I think it's now going to be more like themes of probably motherhood and whatever that entails with the world around it, and kind of trying to also, I think there's the art world in general has different ways of operating now. Like, this has actually turned out to be a really nice thing to do, an artist talk on Zoom. I feel like I'm connecting with a lot more places than I would have. I mean, like, it's so nice that you joined us from London. I know it's kind of late there, so thank you.
It's great. I'm glad I can be here.
Thanks.
Alex, can you hear me?
Yeah.
That's David, right? Thanks, David. Van asked, or she said, I like the surface breathability that your works have. They remind me of the lightness that Kiki Smith has in some of her work. Do you think about this?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Kiki Smith was a huge influence. I think both like with her subject matter and the ways that she treats materials, because her work is so dependent on the material she's using. And when you talk about lightness, I really think about like these sculptures that she made out of paper that became these like levitating figurative sculptures that I love so much. But she also uses fairy tale a ton and mythology in her work in both direct and indirect ways. So yeah, I feel like that's That's a good observation. I like that. I like that comment.
Thank you, Van. And I had a question from another artist, Alvaro. He said, how do you determine the scale of your pieces?
Well, mostly I really like to work at human scale. So where the figures of my work are going to be my size or even a little bit bigger, because that way when you're in a space and you're coming into contact with these paintings, it's really like much more interactive, and you really kind of just sensually relate to those other figures. But also I think it has a lot to do with my process too. I think I relate to them more when they are my size, and it's it's definitely my go-to. It's funny because I came from a place like in undergrad where I was always making much smaller, more illustration-sized works and figures, more like doll size, Barbie size figures. And I really feel like once I had enough space, it was more like in grad school that I really started like splashing around and getting these huge pieces of drafting film, because that was another stopping point for me, was I hadn't found this 60-inch wide drafting film yet. And I did while I was in London, and started working that way with figures that were human scale. And also the other thing that did for me was it really forced me to have a lot of fun with my medium and make those puddles and pools really less controlled. It was a way to kind of make involve my body a lot more in the process. I think with the cranberry juice pieces, I have done a few that were like human scale, but I really do like the intimacy of getting these little doilies and napkins from thrift stores and making them that way. So I consider the making of those two types, so the cranberry on linen and the ink on drafting film, to be like super different modes. But it's really nice for me to take a break from one and the other and kind of operate in a wholly different way. So yeah, I'd say that's pretty much how I decide on scale.
Cool. Thank you. And there was another question in the chat. Am I saying this person's name right? Gali? Over what period of time did you create this work?
So one painting was from 2018. I included it because I really thought it worked with the rest of them. One painting was from 2019, from last year. And then all of the rest, pretty much, all of the rest were completed or even just start to finish during the pandemic. So like since March. And it takes me a really long time to work on pieces. I work on a ton of pieces at a time. So like some of those pieces, like the one with the lobster, I had been working on since for like over a year, and just layering in very slowly and making decisions really slowly. You know, I'll make a move on a painting and then hang it on my wall and work on another one while I figure out kind of what the next move is on that painting. Because for me, unlike, you know, oil on canvas, you can't just like paint over this material. It's really like once you touch it, it's going to be changed forever. And so the planning and the kind of the decisions are really more momentous, I think. And so I have to put a lot of more thought into them. But in the meantime, I like to maintain a balance of like a lot of spontaneity and not have everything like planned out to the T before I start them. But yeah, so I'd say that's how long. And then the cranberry pieces are shorter. So that's like nice because it's a break. Another break from these long-term paintings is I can do these much quicker, sit down and kind of layer in different stains of cranberry juice.
And that was from Gail. My eyes were failing me for a second. I was like, how do you pronounce her name?
Thanks, Gail.
Gail. I didn't see the I before the L. Okay.
I have a question.
What's up?
Do you think there's like a relationship or tension or anything between sort of like the ideas of like the pleasure of sex and infertility and this idea of like sex sort of being functional or something? And is that sort of something that you're thinking about or as you're in the work, not as
Yeah,
work?
definitely. I think that's how I really tied it together for me. I mean, what was funny for me when going through infertility treatment is like, that's so not a part of it anymore. And nobody talks about it. But if you are trying to have a baby naturally, like you have to, like, this is a big part of it, is sex and pleasure, and that is, you know, the basis of all of this. So I think they're really interrelated in kind of both interesting and uncomfortable ways. That's definitely something I'm trying to kind of pick at and unleash for sure. Thanks for that question. It's a good one.
Alex, I have a question.
All right.
In the last painting that you showed us, there were some gold leaf details on the lace on the bottom, but it looked like you had added some illustrations of figuratives within the lace. Can you speak a little bit about that added detail in there?
Definitely. Like, I feel like I'm not very used to just putting like straight up decorative elements into my work. So I think in that move of putting kind of this like gold leaf tiled floor onto that piece, it felt like I wouldn't be motivated to do it unless there was something going on inside of that, that pattern itself. And so I related it, basically I took the pattern from the pattern of the like lace thing that the figure was wearing, but then I started like changing it and making the lace shapes into faces. And then I started making the lace shapes into little figures and little sphinxes. And it's funny because like it happened as I went along from like right to left, or left to right, I forget. And like the first tile is like straight up lace, and I was like so bored. And so then I started like looking at other images and trying to like just sneak little things in there. And I think especially kind of I made that piece, you know, only a couple of years after grad school. And in grad school, I feel like I was really pushed away from doing anything pretty or anything decorative. And so it was like really uncomfortable at first. And that was a way for me to kind of really get into it. So yeah, I'm glad you noticed that.
Thank you.
How we doing, Summer? Any more?
Not that I see, not right now.
Okay.
But Van said, I can see the series helping other women going through fertility treatment. Thank you for your generosity and vulnerability in expressing this, which is very true. Thanks, Alex, for sharing.
Thank you. What was that? I can't hear you.
Did anyone say anything?
Oh, I thought you did. Okay. Well, I feel like if there's no other questions, we're probably pretty good. I really appreciate everyone showing up. I see some people from my art past here, and it makes me so happy. And I also see my family, which is awesome. Thanks, guys. And yeah, so Summer, do you want to give the rundown on the show being up and everything?
Yeah, so you guys, the show is up until November the 7th, and we're still taking appointments. We're taking private appointments from here until November the 7th, and you can go to our website to set that up, or send us a message privately, info@lunaanais.com, or director@lunaanais.com. And you can find us on all the social media platforms. So if you look for Luna Anais Gallery, it's also something we put everywhere. So please keep in touch. Keep up with Alex. She's an incredible artist and person to work with. And yeah, that's where we're at. Thank you, Alex, for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you guys. Thanks, Summer and Anna. You're awesome.
And I just wanted to add that we understand that not everybody is in LA, but we are working on offering people a way to view the exhibit virtually, which we're working on now. So if you know anyone that is interested in seeing the exhibition or learning more about Alexandra's current work, just email us and we'll figure something out.
Great.
And thank you so much for this and for
Are you there?
attending.
Yes.
Wait, are you there?
Sandra? We're
Yeah.
still
Love you.
Thank you. Love you too.
Maybe.
Congrats,
the-
Alex. It's a beautiful, beautiful collection.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
Amazing.
I love it, Alex. You did such an amazing job.
Thank you. Thanks so
For-
much.
You are a true artist.
Allie, so proud of you. So glad you did this and we could be a part of it.
Thanks. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, this was fun.
Love you too, Alex. I'm proud of you too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That was wonderful.
Thanks. All right.
You too, Alex. I'm proud of you too.
Love
I'm
you
so
guys.
proud.
All right.
Well,
Bye.
what can I say? We're all teary. I'm crying.
Oh,
I'm
so
about
cute. You're gonna make me
So
cry.
proud. Have fun this week.
Okay. All right.
Bye, Allie.
Bye.
Love you.
Love you.
Good night. Be safe.
Night.
I don't know if I got off. Am I off?